Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey, let me tell you something about forgiveness that most people get wrong. We think forgiveness means giving somebody another chance. We think forgiveness means letting them back in, reopening the door, sitting back at the table like nothing ever happened. No, forgiveness is not an invitation. Forgiveness is a release. It's you deciding that you're not going to carry that poison in your heart another day longer. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Let's talk about that first keynote. Forgiveness is for your peace, not for his return. A lot of people misunderstand what forgiveness really is. They think it's reconciliation. They think it's reopening a door that should have been closed. They think it means giving somebody another opportunity to hurt you. But forgiveness has nothing to do with giving him access again. Forgiveness is about reclaiming your peace of mind. It's about refusing to let someone else's bad behavior take up permanent residence in your heart. When someone hurts you deeply, the pain doesn't just disappear because time passes. It lingers. It shows up in your thoughts late at night. It creeps into your confidence. It makes you question yourself. You replay conversations. You wonder what you could have done differently. You analyze every detail. And before you know it, you are carrying emotional weight that he dropped on you. That weight becomes anger. That anger becomes bitterness. And bitterness becomes a prison. Now, here's the truth. When you don't forgive, you're not punishing him. You're punishing yourself. He might be out living his life, sleeping peacefully, laughing, moving forward. Meanwhile, you're the one stuck in emotional traffic, replaying the accident over and over again. Forgiveness is you stepping out of that traffic. It's you saying, I refuse to keep reliving this moment. But let's get something straight. Forgiveness does not mean you excuse what he did. It does not mean you approve of it. It does not mean you pretend it didn't hurt. It means you acknowledge the pain and you decide it will not control you anymore. See, forgiveness is an internal decision. It happens in your heart, not in his inbox. You don't have to call him to announce it. You don't have to send a long message saying, I forgive you. You don't need a meeting. You don't need a final conversation. Forgiveness is quiet. It's personal. It's powerful. And here's where people get confused. They think if they forgive, they have to let the person back in. No. That's a separate decision. Forgiveness clears your heart. Trust is earned. Access is earned. And if someone has shown you that they can't handle your heart properly, forgiveness doesn't automatically restore their privileges. Forgiveness is for your nervous system. It's for your sleep. It's for your peace of mind. It's for your future relationships. Because if you don't release the hurt, you carry it forward, and the next person you meet will feel the tension they didn't create. You ever notice how some people say, I'm fine, but they're still angry every time that person's name comes up? That's not peace. That's suppressed pain. Real forgiveness feels different. It feels lighter. It feels like breathing deeper. It feels like no longer needing to win the argument in your head. And let me tell you something powerful. Peace is expensive. It costs letting go. It costs pride. It costs the desire to prove a point. It costs the fantasy that one day he'll suddenly understand what he lost and come back with the perfect apology. Sometimes that apology never comes. Sometimes the understanding never comes. And if your peace depends on his growth, you'll stay stuck. Forgiveness breaks that dependency. When you forgive, you stop waiting. You stop expecting. You stop hoping for justice to look the way you imagined it. You accept that what happened, happened. And instead of asking, why did he do this to me? You start asking, what is this teaching me? That shift is power, because now you're not the victim of the story anymore. You're the student. And students grow. Students evolve. Students level up. Forgiveness also protects your heart from becoming hard. Pain has a way of building walls. You tell yourself you'll never trust again. You'll never open up again. You'll never be vulnerable again. If you let that mindset take over, he doesn't just get your past. He gets your future too. And that's too high a price to pay. Forgiveness says, I will not let this experience turn me into someone I'm not. It allows you to stay kind without being foolish. It allows you to stay open without being naive. It allows you to love again without carrying suspicion into every new connection. Now, I'm not saying it's easy. It's not. Some days you'll feel strong. Other days you'll feel the sting all over again. Healing isn't linear, but every time you choose peace over resentment, you're strengthening a muscle. You're building emotional maturity. You're becoming wiser. And here's the beautiful part. When you truly forgive, you no longer feel the urge to explain yourself to him. You no longer need him to validate your feelings. You don't need him to agree that he was wrong. You don't need him to finally see your value because you see it. That's what forgiveness does. It shifts the focus back to you. It reminds you that your peace is not negotiable. It reminds you that your emotional well-being matters more than winning an argument. It reminds you that holding on to anger is like drinking poison and expecting the other person to suffer. So silently forgive him, not for his benefit, not so he can feel better, not so he can come back. Forgive him because you deserve to wake up without heaviness in your chest. Forgive him because you deserve clarity in your mind. Forgive him because your future is too important to be overshadowed by your past. And once you understand that forgiveness is about your freedom, not his access, you'll move differently. You'll speak differently. You'll choose differently because peace becomes your priority. And when peace becomes your priority, everything else falls into place. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey, let's talk about this second keynote. Silence is power when respect has been broken. Now, I know that's hard for some people to hear because when somebody hurts you, your first instinct is to talk. You want to explain. You want to defend yourself. You want to make sure they understand exactly how wrong they were. You want them to feel what you felt. But let me tell you something. Once respect has been broken, conversation is no longer the solution. Silence becomes the statement. See, respect is the foundation of any relationship, not love, not chemistry, not history, respect. Because when someone truly respects you, they think before they act. They consider your feelings. They move carefully with your heart. But when that respect is broken through lies, betrayal, humiliation, manipulation, something shifts. And once that shift happens, you can't talk your way back into dignity. You restore dignity through distance. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't communicate in healthy relationships. Communication is important. But when someone has repeatedly shown you that they don't value your words, explaining yourself again becomes self-disrespect. If you've already said that hurt me and they did it again, what exactly are you going back to clarify? Silence is not weakness. Silence is control. When you stop arguing, you stop giving them emotional access. When you stop responding, you stop feeding the cycle. Some people thrive on reaction. They thrive on drama. They thrive on knowing they can still push your buttons. And the moment you remove your reaction, you remove their power. Let me explain something about human nature. People don't always listen when you speak, but they always notice when you stop, when your energy shifts, when your presence is no longer available, when the calls stop, when the paragraphs stop, when the emotional access is cut off. That silence speaks louder than any speech you could ever give. But here's the key. You're not using silence to manipulate. You're using silence to protect. There's a difference. Manipulation says, I'm going to ignore you so you chase me. Power says, I'm stepping back because I deserve better. One is a game. The other is growth. When respect has been broken, continuing to engage often lowers your value in their eyes. Not because you're not valuable, but because access becomes too easy. If someone lies to you and you're still available the next day, what lesson did they learn? If someone disrespects you publicly and you're still answering their late-night texts, what boundary was enforced? Silence enforces boundaries without debate. See, strong people don't argue about their worth. They demonstrate it through standards, and standards require consequences. If every action is followed by forgiveness and immediate access, then your words lose weight. But when disrespect is followed by distance, that's when people realize you're serious. And let's talk about emotional maturity. Emotional maturity is not yelling louder. It's not proving your point better. It's knowing when to disengage. It's recognizing that not every battle deserves your energy. It's understanding that once someone crosses certain lines, the healthiest move is to step back and let them sit with what they've done. Because here's the truth. When you keep talking, you keep negotiating. And some things are not negotiable. Loyalty is not negotiable. Honesty is not negotiable. Basic respect is not negotiable. Once those are violated repeatedly, Silence becomes self-respect in action. Now I know it's tempting to send that final message. The one where you lay everything out perfectly. The one where you finally say what you've been holding in. But ask yourself this, are you sending it for closure, or are you sending it hoping for a different response this time? If someone didn't value your voice before, one more speech won't suddenly create understanding. Sometimes silence protects you from further disappointment, because every time you reach out hoping they'll respond differently and they don't, it reopens the wound. Silence allows the wound to close. It allows you to detach emotionally. It allows you to observe instead of react. It allows you to regain control over your feelings, because when you keep engaging, you stay emotionally entangled. But when you step back, you start seeing clearly. And clarity is powerful. You start noticing patterns you ignored. You start realizing red flags you excused. You start understanding that what you were fighting for wasn't even aligned with what you truly deserve. Silence also forces accountability. When you're no longer there to absorb the impact of someone's behavior, they have to face it themselves. They have to sit with the consequences, and whether they grow from it or not is no longer your responsibility. That's another level of maturity, realizing you are not responsible for teaching grown adults how to treat you. You teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. And when respect is broken and you continue tolerating it, you're sending a message that it's acceptable. But when respect is broken and you withdraw your presence, you send a different message. You say, I will not participate in my own disrespect. And let me tell you something else. Silence builds strength inside you. At first, it feels uncomfortable. You'll want to check their social media. You'll want to see if they notice. You'll want to know if they care. But every time you resist the urge to break your silence, you're strengthening your discipline. You're choosing yourself. And choosing yourself consistently changes you. It makes you calmer. It makes you more confident. It makes you less reactive. You stop needing validation from the person who failed to value you. You stop needing them to admit they were wrong. You stop needing the last word, because the last word isn't always spoken. Sometimes the last word is your absence. When respect has been broken, silence isn't about punishing the other person. It's about preserving yourself. It's about protecting your dignity. It's about making it clear, without yelling, without drama, without explanation, that access to you requires honor. And if honor is missing, so are you. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Let's talk about this third keynote. Closure doesn't always require conversation. Now, this right here is where a lot of people get stuck, because we've been taught that in order to move on, we need a final talk. We need to sit down. We need answers. We need explanations. We need that one last moment where everything makes sense. But I'm going to tell you something that might change your life. Closure is not something someone gives you. Closure is something you decide. See, we think closure is a mutual agreement. We think it's two people calmly discussing what went wrong and walking away with understanding. But life doesn't always work like that. Sometimes the person who hurt you doesn't have the emotional maturity to give you clarity. Sometimes they don't even fully understand themselves. And if you're waiting for someone confused to bring you clarity, you're going to be waiting a long time. Closure doesn't require conversation, because the behavior was the conversation. If someone lied repeatedly, that was your answer. If someone cheated, that was your answer. If someone disrespected you publicly, that was your answer. If someone disappeared when you needed them most, that was your answer. Actions speak a language that words can't correct. Now I know it's hard, because your heart wants resolution. Your heart wants to sit across from them and hear, I was wrong, you deserve better. Your heart wants validation. But let me tell you something powerful. Validation that comes too late doesn't heal what early disrespect damaged. Sometimes that final conversation you're chasing only reopens wounds. You think it's going to bring peace, but it brings more confusion. You ask questions, and the answers don't satisfy you. You hope for accountability, but you get excuses. You expect remorse, but you get defensiveness. And now you're hurt all over again. Closure doesn't always live in dialogue. Sometimes it lives in acceptance. Acceptance is you saying, I may never fully understand why this happened, but I accept that it did. That's strength. That's emotional growth. Because the truth is, not every story gets a neat ending. Not every chapter wraps up perfectly. Some chapters end abruptly, some end painfully, some end without explanation. But just because you didn't get the explanation doesn't mean you can't get the lesson. And that's where closure truly begins. When you shift your focus from what they owe you to what you're learning, you start asking yourself different questions. Instead of why did they do this, you ask, what did I ignore? Instead of why wasn't I enough, you ask, why did I settle for less than I deserved? That shift puts the power back in your hands. Because here's the danger of chasing closure through conversation. You place your healing in their hands. You subconsciously say, I can't move on until you explain. And that gives them control over your progress. Real closure says, I don't need your explanation to move forward. It's understanding that sometimes people act out of their own wounds, their own immaturity, their own fears. And while that may explain their behavior, it doesn't excuse it. But more importantly, it doesn't require you to sit there waiting for them to figure it out. Closure is internal peace, not external agreement. You don't need them to admit they lost something good. You don't need them to confess that they mishandled you. You don't need them to say you were right. Because the truth is, even if they said all of that, it still wouldn't undo what happened. Words don't rewrite history, and sometimes the reason you want that final conversation is because you're hoping for a different outcome. You're hoping they'll suddenly become who you needed them to be. You're hoping the talk will spark change. But growth doesn't come from pressure. It comes from personal decision. And you can't force someone to evolve because you're hurting. Closure also means letting go of the fantasy of what could have been, the fantasy of the future you imagined, the fantasy of who you hoped they would become. And that's often harder than letting go of the person. Because you weren't just attached to them, you were attached to the vision. But sometimes the vision wasn't reality. Sometimes you were in love with potential, not patterns. And closure is recognizing that patterns matter more than promises. When you accept that, something shifts inside you. You stop needing that last talk. You stop drafting messages in your head. You stop imagining what you would say if you saw them again. You start redirecting that energy into yourself. Because here's the truth. Every minute you spend chasing closure from someone else is a minute you're not building closure within yourself. Closure within yourself looks like peace when their name comes up. It looks like not checking their social media. It looks like no longer rehearsing arguments in your mind. It looks like emotional neutrality instead of emotional reaction. And neutrality is powerful. It means you're no longer triggered. You're no longer seeking. You're no longer hoping for understanding. You've accepted what is. That doesn't mean you didn't care. It doesn't mean it didn't hurt. It means you've grown beyond needing someone else to complete the ending. Sometimes silence is closure. Sometimes distance is closure. Sometimes simply walking away and not looking back is closure. Because at the end of the day, closure is not about finishing the conversation. It's about finishing the attachment. And once you finish the attachment, the need for conversation disappears on its own. Ladies and gentlemen, Steve Harvey. Let's talk about this fourth keynote. Walking away is sometimes the highest form of self-love. Now, I know that sounds simple, but it's one of the hardest things you'll ever have to do. Because walking away doesn't just mean leaving a person. It means leaving behind memories. It means letting go of hope. It means accepting that what you wanted is not what you're getting, and that hurts. But let me tell you something. Self-love is not just bubble baths and positive affirmations. Self-love is standards. Self-love is boundaries. Self-love is saying, I care about myself too much to keep accepting this. See, a lot of people stay because they're afraid of starting over, afraid of being alone, afraid they won't find better, afraid they invested too much time to walk away now. But time invested is not a reason to keep investing in something that's draining you. If you bought a stock that keeps losing value every single day, at some point you stop telling yourself, well, I've already put so much into it. No, you pull out before you lose yourself completely. And relationships are no different. Walking away is not weakness. It's wisdom. It's recognizing that love without respect is not enough. Love without consistency is not enough. Love without effort is not enough. You can love someone deeply and still understand they are not good for you, and that takes strength because sometimes your heart wants to stay, but our spirit is tired. Your mind is exhausted from overthinking. Your peace has been disturbed for too long. And when you finally say, enough, that's not giving up. That's choosing yourself. Let me tell you something about self-love that people don't talk about. It requires discomfort. It requires you to sit alone some nights. It requires you to fight the urge to text them. It requires you to miss someone and still not go back. That's discipline. That's growth. Anybody can stay in something familiar. It takes courage to step into the unknown. And here's the truth. When you walk away from what disrespects you, you make space for what honors you. But if your hands are still holding on to the wrong thing, they're not free to receive the right thing. Some people are blessings. Some people are lessons. And when the lesson is over, self-love says you don't repeat the class. Walking away also rebuilds your confidence. Because every time you tolerate behavior that hurts you, a part of your confidence shrinks. You start questioning your worth. You start lowering your standards. You start convincing yourself that maybe you're asking for too much. But wanting honesty is not asking for too much. Wanting loyalty is not asking for too much. Wanting effort is not asking for too much. The right person will see your standards and rise to meet them. The wrong person will see your standards and call you difficult. And self-love means you don't shrink to make someone comfortable. You stand firm. You say, if this connection costs me my peace, it's too expensive. Now let's talk about loneliness for a second, because that's the thing that keeps most people stuck. They'd rather be in a draining relationship than be alone. But let me tell you something powerful. There is a difference between being alone and being lonely. Being alone is a season. Being in the wrong relationship can feel lonely every single day. At least when you're alone, your peace is intact. At least when you're alone, nobody is lying to you. Nobody is disappointing you. Nobody is breaking promises. You have space to heal, space to grow, space to rediscover who you are without constant emotional stress. Walking away gives you that space. And in that space, you remember your value. You remember your dreams. You remember your standards. You reconnect with yourself. And when you reconnect with yourself, you stop accepting crumbs just because you're hungry for affection. Self-love says, I would rather eat alone than starve in bad company. That's maturity. And here's something else. When you walk away with dignity, you teach people how to treat you. You show the world that you are not available for half effort. You show yourself that you are strong enough to survive heartbreak. And every time you survive something you thought would break you, you become more powerful. Walking away doesn't mean you didn't care. It means you care about yourself too. It means you understand that staying somewhere you are not valued slowly erodes your spirit. It means you recognize that love should not feel like constant anxiety. It means you accept that chemistry is not compatibility. It means you stop trying to force something that keeps showing you it's not aligned. And sometimes the greatest act of self-love is silence, distance, and forward movement. No dramatic announcement, no revenge, no bitterness, just growth. Because when you truly love yourself, you don't chase what walks away from you. You don't beg for consistency. You don't compete for attention. You don't prove your worth over and over again. You simply remove yourself from situations that don't reflect your value. And yes, it will hurt at first, but temporary pain is better than permanent disrespect. One day you'll look back and realize that walking away was the turning point. The moment you chose strength over comfort, the moment you chose peace over attachment, the moment you chose yourself over fear,